Welcome back to the Inside the Rink podcast. In episode 38, we will cover Gavin McKenna's 54-game point streak ends, Joel Quenneville hired in Anaheim, Max Domi's hit on Alexander Barkov, Alex Petrovic's controversial goal, Mason Marchment slashes an official, and more second-round playoff hockey talk. But first, I want to welcome my co-host, Chris LaValle. How are you today, Chris?
I am fantastic. Chaotic weekend. Nice to settle down a little bit here and actually talk some hockey.
I completely agree with that. It was quite the roller coaster of weather and just general life and all that. But here we are. It was, like I said in kind of the preview stuff, even the hockey world was kind of crazy too. So a lot of debates going on, and it seems like it's that point of the playoffs where everybody's going to start getting at each other's throats. So, and yet there's yet to be a fight. I want to point that out.
Yeah, that's surprising.
It's surprising we've gotten so far without a fight.
You would think like Florida and Tampa would have fought in like the first round, or even like Washington, Carolina now.
And I think that's more or less teams not wanting to lose a player for 5 minutes. But here, I don't want to say here we are, but you know what I'm kind of alluding to, hey?
Yep.
And before we get into things, I want to hear a word from our sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook.
DraftKings Sportsbook is Boston's hometown sportsbook. It's live right here in Massachusetts. Bet local on all your favorite sports from the comfort of your own home with DraftKings. To celebrate, all new customers will receive up to $150 in bonus bets when you sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook using code ITR. You can now bet local on money lines, spreads, props, and more with one of America's top-rated sportsbooks. That's DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Sign up with the code ITR to get up to $150 in bonus bets to use now that mobile sports betting is live in Massachusetts. That's code ITR only at DraftKings Sportsbook.
If your loved one is experiencing problems with gambling, call 800-327-5050 or visit helplinema.org to speak with a trained specialist free and confidentially 24/7. Must be 21 plus, physically present in Mass. Eligibility restrictions apply, subject to regulatory licensing requirements. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as free bets. Terms at DraftKings.com/MA.
Well, Chris, I don't know how much junior hockey you follow, but this is around the season where I really start to follow it with the Memorial Cup, the Centennial Cup, two levels of hockey that are really ramping up as they're getting into their end stretch. And Gavin McKenna of the Medicine Hat Tigers was on a historic 54-game point streak. It's a CHL record, and he's 17. He's not draft eligible until next season, which is one of the big things to point out. When you look at all the stats, he was second in the WHL with points with 129 points in 56 games, and he added another 37 points in 16 playoff games. So just the amount of talent there is already to be shown, I think that shows you the development of the league and these players and where they're headed. But McKenna's point streak, 54 games, it dates back to November 2nd. So
it's going to make next year's lottery. It's going to make next year's lottery must watch.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And while the 2025 draft class, there's a lot of debate on who's going first. I think Gavin McKenna is making himself a really, really strong case, kind of like Bedard.
Yeah, it appears like he's in that class as of right now, like Bedard, McDavid, those names that came out and were 1-1 right out of the gate.
Yeah. And the last time we knew that there was a clear-cut number one first overall pick, obviously Bedard, there was a lot of people screaming Lafreniere, and personally, you can argue that he wasn't a clear-cut, but looking back at the strength of the draft class, hindsight's 2020. But nobody has been on the level of Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews. Like, there has been that clear-cut talent that has made that impact since then. And that's not a knock on the players nowadays. It's just how the game has developed. And maybe Gavin McKenna could do that and make that immediate impact. But we've yet to see that for another couple of seasons. So, yeah, it's going, like you said, it's going to be interesting for the lottery around this time of the year. It's going to be the Gavin McKenna lottery, and we'll probably be, well, not probably, we will be talking about this in a year's time, or right around relatively a year's time. So, speaking of a team that was in I don't want to say limbo of lottery, but in the limbo of the lottery were the Anaheim Ducks, and they got a new head coach, and that's Joel Quenneville. Chris, he's an Anaheim Duck.
Good. I mean, honestly, with all the stuff outside of or what happened, it seems he cleared the air on that situation. He said that during his introductory press conference. You and I talked last week. I said, that I thought what he did with the Blackhawks and that young core, and what he can do now with the Ducks and the young core that they've established, I think they could be a very good team. If not next year, the year after.
And I completely agree with you on that. Just the way that Anaheim is built, they have a lot of veteran pieces that provide valuable assets. Like, you got Radko Gudas as your captain, who won a Stanley Cup last season. This is a team that is going to build. And when you look at veteran guys, yes, you can build with them into the future, but they're only around as long as, one, the money's right, and if they don't retire, pardon me. And that's a lot of things the way with veteran guys, but that's also the beauty of the game is it allowed, like, when the veteran guys do move on, it allows for the younger guys to come up and turn into those the experienced players that the younger players that say Anaheim will draft. They get to learn from the guys that are now the big stars, like Leo Carlson, or will be the big stars.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and I agree with you on the fact that Quenneville's the right guy to lead this charge. So,
and let's not forget, I think the one question this offseason with that team is what are they going to do with the goalies? They have a good, solid goalie, 1A, 1B situation. Is one of those guys moved for another key piece that, makes the core somewhat better this season?
I don't see why they wouldn't. And that's because there's been so much smoke around John Gibson
for years.
For however many years now. When they traded Frederik Andersen to the Ducks, or from the Ducks to the Leafs, they had two really good goaltenders, and then Gibson became their guy. Gibson then became a part of a lot of trade rumors, and I thought this deadline we were looking at a situation where Gibson was going to get moved on or moved at the deadline, but and we had talked about this, is a lot of teams weren't going to make the decision of are they buyers or sellers or just in between until probably 48 hours before. And I think that's the case with Anaheim. And now
they were still in it.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of teams still were. I think there was 25 teams that were relatively competing, or 25 teams in the standings that were either in a playoff spot or competing for it. And we didn't see a lot of teams get eliminated until that final stretch of 5-6 games in the season. But now with Anaheim, you have this young core, and maybe you look at your younger goaltender and you roll with that young guy. You go through all the punches, go through all the motions as a young group, because there's no better way to get experience as a young group than just play the game and maybe they end up in the playoffs next year because they get a good haul for Gibson, and it really solidifies what they already have. Because look at other teams that are competing, and we're going to get into this later. A team like Edmonton could use a goaltender who is a proven number one. And that's not a knock on Pickard or Skinner, but maybe they need that proven number one. But speaking of a team or a teammate that was traded to the Leafs of Gibson, when we talked about Anderson, Max Domi and the Barkov hit. I have a lot to say about this. I don't think it was a good hit. It was a late hit. It was bad, and it was worthy of a major penalty, which he was assessed on the play. Max Domi's hit, it's a real nail biter because it kind of goes on the fine line of what Florida has done in the series and previously, but you can't, from either side, referee, fan, or team person, like personnel, you cannot look at any hit and say, oh, well, that's retaliatory because they did it to us. Regardless of, it's not a good hit. And Domi got sucker punched by a couple of guys. He got hit by a couple of guys, and any team would go in and defend their top defender pretty much, or, their top defensive forward. And that's what Florida did. And Domi gets a fine for it. Chris?
I honestly think he should have been at least suspended a game at the minimum. It's my personal opinion. I don't agree with the hit at all, like you said. But I don't. It seems like you said they're not. I feel like penalties are kind of somewhat down, and it seems like they're just letting them play for the most part. And it's most of the stuff I've seen, but he was given a penalty, but my opinion is, they're just going to let him play and have them battle it out the series and see what happens.
And who knows? Maybe we'll see a little bit more fight in Game 5 between Florida and Toronto, because the last 20 minutes of that game was very physical, and it was a game where Florida seemed like they knew they had it in. They knew they had the game almost put away because Toronto was starting to play with more emotion.
It's a best of 3 now, so things are starting to get really chippy.
It's similar to that Winnipeg St. Louis series.
Yep.
Whoever took Game 5, it looks like they're going to win. And win 2 at home, lose 2 on the road. That's similar trend. And speaking of a team that Winnipeg is playing, Game 1, Mikko Rantanen with a natural hat trick in the second period. He is on an absolute tear. Chris, I know I texted you about this and a couple other people that I was talking to about the game. And if Rantanen is the only bit of offense that the Stars have, that may not be good news for them, but they showed up in Game 3 and really, like, Rantanen still had a large part of it, but they showed up as a team and kind of decimated a lot of hopes in Game 1 there for maybe losing all on the road and winning all of them at home for the Jets. Because now that scenario is not possible.
One name to watch in that series is Wyatt Johnston. And once he starts going for that Dallas Stars team, and if him and Rantanen are clicking at the same time,
to go.
He finished off the Colorado series pretty well. I think he had 3 points or something like that in the last 3 games. Actually, he had more than that. He had 5 points in the last 5 points in the last 3 games on 3 goals. So he scored a goal in yesterday's game. If he starts going and Rantanen's hot like he is, that Stars offense is going to start rolling.
And that's the thing, like, for a team that is as defensively structured as Winnipeg is, they have shown multiple times in the Stanley Cup playoffs so far that you string together a couple of quick goals, it's a whole mental thing where they seem to crumble. And the first Kickstarter of that, which happened in yesterday's game, was Alex Petrovic's game-winning goal. You can argue it was kicked in or it was a controversial goal, but you could argue it was kicked in or it was redirected as he was trying to move his skate. There's been a lot of arguments. Chris, I don't know if you've seen the Scouting the Refs, the whole screenshot of that. I'm not going to read the rules out, but it's right on their website, right all over their social medias, that it says right in the rule book that even if, like, a kicking motion, which Petrovic, it was a kicking motion, that it should be a disallowed goal immediately. And I was listening to 32 Thoughts today, and a really good point brought up by Kyle Bukauskas was if this is how they're going to call that goal, and if it happens later on in another series or later on in the Stanley Cup Finals, you have to call it the same way. And that's something I completely agree with. Because simply is, if you call it the other way and Winnipeg is out and Dallas is in, and you're just going to hear a lot of screaming and all that when it comes to, well, the rule book isn't being taken right to what it is. And that's been a lot of the argument so far. I think it almost went off of the fact that it was going on so long and there wasn't anything definitive to say, well, there was a lot of kicking motion or it wasn't fully redirected off the stick. So I don't think there was a rebuttal from either side that could give the refs a definitive yes or no to make an argument or a case. And I think that's why they said it redirected off of Hellebuck's stick.
I can also see it as like, when I watched it the first time, I didn't see it as a kicking motion, but then watching it over and over again, I saw it more as kicking motion. The first time I saw it, it looked like he just kind of moved his skate a little bit and it just deflected off his skate. Like he didn't provide the kicking motion. Again, not off the top of my head, I don't know the full rule. So like maybe that classifies as a kicking, but to me, that's how it looked. And like you said, it did deflect off after. So maybe that's what changed their mind to not rule it that.
Yeah. And it could go either way, but the game, it was a very heated game. And then just like 49 seconds right after, 47 or 49 seconds after that goal, Mikko Rantanen scores. Mikko Rantanen or Thomas Harley. I'm pretty sure it was Thomas Harley's goal, but it was right in the slot. It was a beautiful snapshot right after. No, it was Rantanen. Sorry. Yeah, Rantanen. But he danced around a few four Jets defenders, gets the snapshot, and Scott O'Neill's forced to take a timeout to settle his team down. But like I said, the Jets seem to crumble when a couple of goals get scored against them. And this was a complete showing of how they crumble. And maybe they can rebound in game 4, but not having won a road playoff game in 8 games now, that could haunt them, and maybe that continues later in the series for them. So
that game is going to be must watch tomorrow.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the last of the notes we have for the Winnipeg Dallas game from yesterday is Mason Marchment slashes an official. The official doesn't file a report, and there's no suspension on the play. Well, I think it was more or less a heat of the moment thing, because I don't know if you saw the clip, but he slashes him, and then Sportsnet cuts over right after intermission to Marchment apologizing to the same official. And I wonder if it was bury the hatchet kind of thing, not going to make a big deal out of it. That's where I wonder, maybe it was like a more or less a gentleman's handshake kind of deal, like, hey, heat of the moment, sorry. Because if you've played any professional, or if you've played any organized sports, not professional sports, any organized sports, you know that there is a lot of heat of the moment, and stuff comes out. Like, you do stuff, maybe you didn't mean to do that or say that. And I'm wondering if that's the case for Marchment in such a tight game at that time, when right after Scheifele gets him in the hip, maybe he's trying to let the official know what he thought of it.
That's what I kind of was wondering, because as I watch it over and over again, to me it seems like, he kind of just tried to tap him like, hey, did you see that? And I think maybe it realized after the fact, he probably realized he did a little too hard, and that's when he went up after the period and apologized and was like, I didn't mean to do it that hard, I was just trying to get your attention. And that's where they just buried the hatchet right there. That's the way I see it. And I think that's why there's no discipline, and that's why there was no report filed.
Yeah, and Elliot Friedman, I'm going to reference him another time here, but he mentioned that every time an official reports abuse of officials, well, it's a pretty hefty suspension, and it's usually multiple games, sometimes in the digits, and it's quite the turn of events when you see there's no suspension on the play. Arguably, you could say there should have been like a fine or something like that, because it's not incidental contact or anything. It's like he meant to tap the official to get his attention, as we said, but maybe it's like the Petrovic thing. There wasn't anything definitive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of where that lies. And finally, this last series of the West, Game 4 of this series is quite the game. Edmonton goes up early, Vegas comes back and ties it, and then tie game again late, and quite the heartbreaker as Stuart Skinner a mile out of his net. Costly goal against with 0.4 seconds left on the clock. That deflects off of Leon Draisaitl's skate, and the Oilers lose Game 4, and they're headed back tonight to Edmonton to play Game 5, when it probably should be a 3-1 series.
Yeah, I mean, that team, we talked about them with the King series and all of that, with how changing the goalie, and that they just rode the momentum of that with six straight come from behind wins, and then you go to Skinner and he just doesn't seem to have it, and I don't know what he was doing on that play where he was so far out of the crease.
I don't know either. I watched the replay after I got home Saturday night, and I saw it, and my first thought was the Steve Dangle clip, if you're a goaltender, tend the goal. Because there was no goal being tended there.
It's just an open net.
Just a wide open net. Like you mentioned, the whole ride the goaltender momentum. Calvin Pickard is hurt right now. He hasn't played since Game 2. Could that be costly for the Oilers? We could possibly see that tonight. Because maybe that's what forces them to go out and get a goaltender in the offseason or next season. Because
they're such a roller coaster. That team, Skinner last year in the finals, and then this year, obviously Skinner starts it, and then they go to Pickard, and now injured. Like, they got to do something. We talked about at the deadline. Was Binnington the option for them? And obviously we know the Blues held on to Binnington, but a name we said earlier, John Gibson, seems like a name. Now, does Anaheim want to trade within the division? Probably not. But you never know. Right. I mean, depending upon what you're getting back for him. So it's definitely an interesting question. They're their team to watch in the goaltender market this offseason.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on that one, because if they lose 4 straight with Skinner in net, you're going to for sure keep Pickard because he's been really good so far, very serviceable. You got to make a tough decision on Stuart Skinner, though. Yep. And like you bring up a good point, is the offseason could be pivotal for a lot of teams, but specifically the Oilers and their goaltending situation, because you got to if you're Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, 15 of 16 wins. That's as close as you can get, other than losing in a heartbreaking double overtime loss in Game 7. That's as close as you can get to the Cup, being 1 goal from tying it, and Florida wins their Stanley Cup after losing the year prior. And a lot of parallels between the Oilers' last playoff run compared to this one. And the first is, last year, everything seemed to go right for the Oilers, and it's a complete flip-flop this year. It is a dumpster fire for Edmonton right now. Like the fact they have 6 wins on the season or in the playoffs so far is kind of surprising because they lose the first 2 against LA and then win the next 4. Win the first 2 against Vegas, lose the next 2, pending a result in the 5th game of that series. So that's the first. The second is a complete similar thing to last year is goaltending. You got to flip flop between your goaltenders, and maybe Edmonton finds their way back to the finals, and Stuart Skinner finds his Stuart Skinner self. And maybe that's it.
That's what they're going to hope for to save their season right now because the way things look, I mean, again, they're up 2-1 in the series.
Yeah.
So, but tonight, everything changes. We said it when we did the breakdown of the Kings Oilers series. One call from the Kings coach to challenge that play gave Edmonton all the momentum, and they rode it for all 4 games to move on. Could the Pickard injury, where it sounds like he's out at least a week, from what I saw earlier, could that flip the momentum now to Vegas, and they're going to take 4 straight?
Yeah, and I just want to correct myself because I just realized it is Game 4 tonight, not Game 5, and I'm speaking as if that Oilers series was already in Game 5. So I'm not some psychic voodoo person if Vegas wins tonight because I'm not predicting anything, but who knows what happens Game 4 tonight, not Game 5. I've only been saying that all night, but
well, with our luck, it'll be Vegas losing tonight with our curse.
It'll be the Inside the Rink podcast curse at that point.
Yep.
Yeah. But maybe Skinner finds a way tonight. Up 2-1, not tied 2-2. But that's where that series is at. And if you look at how Vegas battled, the other thing to note for tonight's game, as we get into series recaps up to now, Vegas is without their captain. He might not play tonight. And could that be a chance for Edmonton to pounce? Because, arguably, Vegas has a pretty good team, well-rounded, but losing your leader, your number one guy that you put the C on, that could be what is make or break for any team. Think of it like this. If Carolina, Toronto, Florida, any teams in the playoffs right now lose their captain, it's a pretty hard hit to that team.
Mm-hmm.
If Dallas loses Jamie Benn or Winnipeg loses Adam Lowry, that sucks a lot of momentum out of those 2 teams. But Vegas not having their captain or potentially not having their captain for Game 4, that's where it starts to get foggy. And pivoting to the Central Division, the second round there is, if you look at how that series has gone, one bad game by Winnipeg not covering Rantanen. If you cover Rantanen, you could probably squeak out a 2-1 win or go to overtime 2-2. Because there was a couple of Rantanen goals that were he earned them. And Hellebuck's shutout on Friday. Then the 5-2 loss with the controversial game-winning goal last night. We've already kind of covered this in depth, but Game 4 being tomorrow night, if Dallas goes up 3-1, it's done in 5. And I hate to say it like that so bluntly, but sucking that much momentum out of a team that's won the President's Trophy, and then you're going to their home barn. Dallas has, they've already picked one game on the road. It's not like they're going to struggle in Game 5. Could it be a confidence shaking thing if Winnipeg doesn't tie the series up tomorrow night and they go 0-9 on the road in their last 9 games?
It's not a good look for them. And I mean, obviously going down 3-1 in the series isn't a good look no matter what, but that, I mean, obviously we all know, I don't even have to say it, going back home if you're down 3-1 is a must win, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But we know in a must win, for the most part in this playoff so far, Connor Hellebuck has played the Hart Trophy Connor Hellebuck that we saw this season.
But
So,
like, maybe knock on wood, but maybe Connor Hellebuck does the same thing after game one and has a massive game following a loss like that.
it wouldn't surprise. I mean, honestly, it doesn't surprise me at all. It's just
Because
it's so interesting the season he had, but now going into the playoffs, and it's you have to ask the question every Winnipeg game when the puck drops: which Connor Hellebuck are we getting tonight?
yeah,
I
and
mean, it's an odd question to have to ask going into the playoffs when you have a Vezina trophy, like what two time and trying to go back to back, and probably honestly probably likely will be back to back. But now he's also the Hart Trophy candidate on the season he
yeah,
had.
the leading Vezina Trophy favorite, and probably not the leading Hart Trophy favorite, but he's in the top three as we know, and he's probably not number three.
You can make a strong case that he deserves it as well. I mean, you can make a
Yeah,
strong case for all three, but I think you can make a stronger
correct.
case for Hellebuck.
Well, that's why they're the final three.
Right.
Like, there's a reason there's a strong case for all of them and not just one of them. Because if it was one of them, well, then they would just give the player the award anyways.
Yeah.
But
I mean, but you're seeing the other thing you noticed from was it last night's game? Yeah, last night's win was you saw 5 different Stars players score a goal. So unlike game 1 where they won, where it was Ronton leading the offense, 5 different players scored a goal last night.
and that brings my point up from earlier is if Rantanen was the only goal scorer in that series, it wouldn't be that great for Dallas, and it would be maybe it could be just a great thing for Winnipeg, but Dallas gets 5 different scores like you mentioned, and that's going to be what puts a nail in the coffin. On top of that, the Jets are not performing to their season-leading power play that they had. In the playoffs, that seems to have just blown up. And Chris, there's a lot of factors, and next week we might be talking about one or another result, or maybe in Game 7 a result. Who knows?
Very well likely. I mean, it all
Yep.
depends what you get tomorrow night.
Yep. And speaking of a series where it's most likely going to go 7, just of how it looks right now, is that Washington-Carolina series. You don't think that Game 3 was a shift?
I think it might be over soon.
Okay.
As of right now, Carolina's up 2-0, and they look like they're dominating the Capitals. So they could very well, if they hold on to this lead, take a 3-1 series lead. I don't know if Washington's good. Obviously, they had a chance at the President's Trophy this year, and they were the top seed in the Eastern Conference. So they can definitely come back. But if it does become 3-1, Carolina just looks like they're on a mission this year.
Yeah, and the one thing that is being displayed in this Stanley Cup playoffs is 6 games seems to be that sweet spot, because you're seeing Dallas and Winnipeg put each other's feet to the fire, while Edmonton and Vegas seem to be a little bit more mellowed right now. Got Toronto and Florida going at it. They're kind of mellowed, even though it's getting more intense. But then you got that Washington Carolina series, and I'm thinking is Washington kind of. I think Washington kind of blew everything they had, like put all their chips in right away against Montreal, and now they're surviving on fumes. Because that's where it looks like it can go either way, because if Washington plays like they played that Montreal series, it could be a different story, but you got Rod Brindamore with a dialed-in Hurricanes team and
a dialed-in goaltender. I mean, Frederik
Yep.
Anderson has looked dominant in the Stanley Cup run. Playoff run.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what do you mean Stanley Cup run?
Playoff run. I'm getting ahead of myself. Way past game
We're
5.
still like a month out from that.
Way past game
Month and a
5.
half.
But I mean, he's as long as he stays healthy, they could be a scary team. I mean, I don't know if either team in the Atlantic wants to see Carolina right now.
Yeah.
If they move on, obviously.
But shifting over to that Toronto Florida series, with the way that those two teams have played, I wouldn't be surprised if either team advances to the Cup final against Carolina. And that's because you got two heavyweight teams going at it, and maybe Carolina can match up, but I don't see where a team like Carolina could do some good damage against Toronto or Florida with how they have been rolling their lines against each other and literally beating each other to a pulp, literally and physically.
Well, that's kind of like we said when we started our preview for the first round, where I said, I thought Winnipeg was going to move on easily against the Blues, and they might have an easier chance against the Stars and Avalanche. I know nothing's ever really easy in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but easier chance where those two teams beat up on each other for 7 games. Whereas you could sit here right now and look at Carolina and say they move on in 5, and you expect that Florida-Toronto series to go 7, and they just beat up on each other in 7 games. Going into that Carolina series, a well-rested Hurricanes team could be very dangerous against either one of those teams.
But the other thing about and just to wrap up my thoughts here, the other thing about the Stanley Cup playoffs is consistency is also a factor in how these teams play, and maybe there's too much rest. If Carolina goes by in 5 and Toronto, Florida go to 7, and there's 2-3 days in between games that Toronto plays, whereas Carolina gets, say, 5, 6, 7 days, that could be a big difference maker because, yes, Carolina's going to be watching that film, studying the Leafs or Florida, whichever they get for an opponent, if Carolina moves on early, like we were saying. But maybe it's also it's a complete mental thing where you can't shift back into that focus immediately after a longer break. Because just finishing this thought here, but look at the teams that slumped right after the Four Nations break. Like, there's a lot to consider with that. And with that said, Chris, that's episode number 38 of the Inside the Rink podcast. Thank you for listening, and we will be back next week.